Welcome to Pioneers in Payments, where payments experts share their insights. Now, here's our host, Donna Blum.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of Pioneers in Payments. Today, I have the great pleasure of speaking with Peter Davey from its PaymentsJedi Advisory. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you so much, Tom. I appreciate it.
Before we get started, Peter, would you mind sharing with our audience a little bit about yourself, your background in the payments industry, and then also the work that you do at PaymentsJedi Advisory? That's a mouthful.
It is, but it's fun to say too. Just a little bit about my background. I actually started off my career in the technology space and was actually developing some of the first .com assets that existed online, bringing companies online for the first time, and that's where I fell in love with this whole thing called payments. And even as a business management major with a computer science background, I didn't really fully appreciate how well the economy moves until you're involved in the payment schemes and moving money in that space. And just fell in love with the complexity. Spent some time working at third-party payment processors. Spent a decade at Capital One. Built enterprise payments from the ground up. Helped to drive a lot of their strategic initiatives across the entire company for payments. Running strategy for a number of years, and then was working on Zelle and clearinghouse work around real-time payments, and decided I would make this switch over to the industry side of it, and ran product innovation and strategy for the clearinghouse for 7 years, helping to as one of the architects for the RTP network, and then helping to build out a lot of the assets with the financial institutions around products and capabilities that they needed to be able to actually take advantage of instant payments in the US. So really fun opportunities. Really enjoyed my time in all those spaces, and now with Payments Jedi Advisory, I'm working directly with financial institutions, of all sizes, but ones that really need help with strategic planning and implementation, connecting to various different vendors across the industry, working with fintechs to help them with their go-to-market strategies in the payment space, and to a certain extent, really helping to demystify this whole payments ecosystem for folks who don't specialize in it all day long. I spent my entire career specializing in payments, and you know how difficult it is sometimes to explain payments to folks who just don't really spend all day in this space.
So true. And you might define it today, but it's going to look entirely different tomorrow.
That's the beautiful thing about being in the payments industry. Over my almost 30-year career in the payments industry, I've seen a ton of change. I've actually driven a lot of change, whether it be bilateral ACH, moving into same-day ACH, or on the RTP side, or helping to move Clear Exchange into EWS to be able to drive Zelle forward. So I've been at the forefront of a lot of the change, and I hope to continue to be at the forefront of a lot of that change, helping financial institutions really rewrite the payment script for themselves.
So very needed in this industry. And really, kind of the purpose of this podcast as well is to sort of just distill all that's happening in the payments industry and try to provide some, I guess, some best practices. It can be very much, um, you know, analysis paralysis. There's so much to take into consideration, and so having experts like yourself that can kind of really just boil it down and and make it as simple as possible to make decisions and move forward. So needed. So, getting into the meat of the podcast, obviously there's a lot going on in the industry today, and there will continue to be so. But based on today, the environment today, what is the most notable trend in the payments industry from your perspective?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that I would highlight. First and foremost, obviously, the move to and the adoption of instant payments, it continues to take a very big front seat. And I think this is where a lot of financial institutions and technology companies are having challenges, is figuring out, well, how does this whole instant payments work really fit into what I've already set up, or how my customers are going to interact with it? I think the other piece is in the card space. Certainly we've got multiple opportunities to be able to send, real time and then near time payments. And the card networks have opened up dramatically to really helping to solve for a lot of the SMB and consumer money movement scenarios outside of Zelle, outside of some of the other applications that exist in the P2P space. But even more so, you're starting to see a really big trend toward leveraging the card networks for international cross-border transactions among consumers and some SMBs. And I think those two trends are really driving a lot of opportunity, but also a lot of consternation in the industry among players who are just trying to figure out how they fit into those ecosystems.
Yeah, so true. When there's fewer players, maybe the decisions are a little easier, but as everybody is starting to move in a similar direction towards more instant and faster payments, and it's available now through, as you said, like Visa and MasterCard now have some solutions that compete in that area. I guess it makes it, it's nice to have options, but sometimes too many options is not a good thing.
Well, it does certainly confuse things, I think, especially for financial institutions that really haven't spent a lot of time in the payment space. I've said this many times over the last, almost 15 years of my career, which is you can be a payments company without being a bank, but you can't be a bank without being a payments company. The reality of that situation is that a lot of financial institutions don't see themselves as payments companies. They really haven't focused in on the strategic nature of how payments actually impacts their customers. They've seen it more as a necessary evil because they're much more lending focused than they are, on the treasury management or wholesale side of the business, which really drives a lot of financial institutions in the payment space. And I think as you kind of unpack that a little bit, now that there's a need to do something different, there a lot of financial institutions are starting from square one. They're relying on their core providers for a lot of the services. They outsource most of it to bankers, banks, or to other groups out there. And because they don't have control of some of those assets, they don't necessarily know where to start or how to move forward. I think the other thing too is the last time a lot of folks did major upgrades to their payment systems, it was probably during one of the mandated ACH changes, whether it was IAT or the simplification of some of the SEC codes. And those all were tremendously complicated projects that took lots of time and lots of money. Fast forward now to 2025, and we're in a scenario where technology is a lot more accessible. It's a lot cheaper. It's a lot easier to implement. It's a lot easier to have multiple vendors now working on specific aspects of your strategy. And, again, if you're not a payments professional and you're not a technologist in nature, and you're a CEO of a mid-sized financial institution, you're probably wondering how you get there from where you are today.
Yeah, so true. It's so necessary to have somebody that has that expertise and kind of can help them develop the roadmap. So, when we're talking about payments organizations, and banks are included, obviously, what would you say is the greatest opportunity that they have today?
I think a lot of it really comes down to automation and simplification. So we've spent so much time as an industry trying to educate our customers or end customers as to how payments move, whether it's ACH in a couple of days or, whether it's moving to now same day ACH for things like payroll. We've taught them that they have to understand the word wire. We potentially give them a different routing number for them. They find the easiest use being things like cards because they're just access devices to whether it's a lending line or a deposit balance. Um, and I think now we have an opportunity to reset and kind of just treat a payment as a payment as a payment and try to deliver better experiences to our customers. And taking advantage of APIs and then ultimately the real time and instant payment networks, we have the ability to automate a lot of business payments. So I see for all the vendors that are out there, including financial institutions, the opportunity is really about simplification, not just for themselves, but for their customers. And then, trying to drive a lot of the business process automation that will ultimately take a lot of goo out of the ecosystem.
Right. And I would think that automation will actually result in less friction for the consumers, right? Like that's kind of, I think, I hear that at all the conferences, right? It's like, meeting the customers where they're at and trying to make it as seamless and frictionless as possible. Um, on the flip side, you also kind of have, if there's less friction, there might be more opportunity for fraud. So you really have to balance that. But yeah, so important.
I think that's a true statement if you keep things as they are or status quo. If you don't actually improve your processes, you're going to have potentially more fraud, but you're likely going to have that with ACH and check and card anyway because you're not making the appropriate process improvements. When we first launched the RTP network back in 2017, a lot of our focus was this really is in a complete new process capability. As you're thinking about architecting it, you should be thinking about moving every payment in real time, whether or not it's actually fulfilled on top of RTP or FedNow. And in doing that, you are then adding different process points in between to catch fraud, to catch risky transactions, to be able to see the anomalies way better than you can do it in the batch environment today. And it's not about getting rid of ACH or same-day ACH or card payments. It really just is about starting to treat all these payments a little bit more equally. And if you're analyzing them in real time and you put those processes in place, you have a massive opportunity to reduce risk, to reduce fraud, regardless of the modality of the payment and the way it's fulfilled. So I think it's more people who are just looking at the old way of doing things and the old way of fraud detection, not necessarily looking at how they use instant payments as a catalyst to actually improve the entire environment and ecosystem.
Yeah. Well, and the big picture is really it should be taken into consideration, right? Yeah. And moving on.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot to think about, and I feel bad for the folks who are struggling with it right now, which is one of the reasons I drove toward developing Payments Jedi Advisory because there's a lot to think about. I was actually just with a customer this week, and talking to them about what their strategy is, and they're like, "Yeah, we've got all of these like plans." I'm like, "Okay, great. So how do they all work together?" They're like, "Oh." Well, we haven't really thought about that. And I think that's the challenge is like, there especially point solutions that vendors can offer. There's a lot of good opportunities to improve certain parts of the process, but you really have to think about the process from end to end if you want to actually drive a lot of the process efficiencies as well as the risk out of the process.
Yeah. Now, BHMI, we're a software vendor, and our software in the back office. I mean, the back office is not something that is often front of mind. A lot of times, so much of the focus is more on the front end systems and interfaces with the consumers and that sort of thing. So it needs to be balanced, right? Taking the entire ecosystem into consideration, like you said. Yeah. Okay, so we talked about the greatest opportunity. What would you say is the greatest challenge for organizations that are processing payments?
I would just say the pace of change. It's funny, as we entered into sort of 2008 and the advent of blockchain and Bitcoin, um, and then we saw the decline of some of the financial institutions through stress testing and other types of capabilities. And then we moved into cloud technology. And from there, the growth rate of different technologies, different options out there has been just insanely cool to watch, but also just like there's almost too many options out there. We talked about it at the beginning, the difference between the card networks, Zelle, PayPal, Venmo, different B2B applications that exist out there. Almost every single merchant now is coming up with their own application that they want their customer to interface with, where they're managing rewards or building brand recognition, potentially doing payments. It's a lot to try to unpack. And the technology, the rate of change just continues to move forward, especially, now with AI, the leveraging of AI on the data side, models to be able to help to make things a lot easier for your customer base. How do you implement those? How do you get access to the data? I think the challenge is really just the magnitude of change that people are dealing with. And, again, as a financial institution, you're probably thinking, well, which one do I start with? I can't do it all. So how do I start or find the right place to apply the limited budget that I have to be able to move this ecosystem forward?
All right. It's kind of that whole principle, and we've talked about it on the podcast before, but how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time, right? You just got to figure
Yeah,
out which bite are you going to take first, and
that's
then
exactly right.
next.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
And also being able to be a little bit more fluid with the plans. I mean, I think gone are the days of 5-year strategic plans and roadmaps. I think if you're not thinking about things every 18 months and making the appropriate changes to your plan, um, then it's not going to work out for you. We're not talking about 3-year projects anymore. You're talking about, trying to get to something that you can implement every 6 months and then make the appropriate changes as you're migrating forward, while still keeping your eye on the prize, which is how you actually best service your customers. Who are your customers? And I think, to me, that's the biggest opportunity, kind of in the industry, is for financial institutions to become more specific as to how to service their customers, how to service their members, and how to make sure that they're addressing the needs of their community. That creates differentiation, but also creates a much smaller aperture of which they need to then address for their ecosystem.
Right. Yeah, so true. And we do talk a lot about that a lot, hear that a lot, being very, very customer centric. That's how you create the value in this industry, right? Is by making, I guess, the lives of your customers and or your business clients, just making their lives better, easier. Yeah. So, if you had to take your sum total of knowledge in the industry, which is a lot, and provide our audience with one silver bullet piece of advice, what would that be?
Silver bullet. Wow. Um, I think the biggest piece of advice that I would give people is that, yeah, and this is a little bit contrary to, I think, my position probably 10 or 15 years ago, which was have a payment strategy. Have a payment strategy that fits into your banking strategy. Have a payment strategy that fits into your product strategy or your customer strategy. And it's a component. So I think we oversteered toward trying to get people to just think about payments. Well, the reality is, even us payments professionals, just, while we do think about payments a lot more specifically, we still think about them in the context of how it's actually ultimately going to address the customer need. And I think being able to develop a well-rounded strategy and plan that helps you execute against your customer's need, that includes money movement, is probably the most important thing. And I wouldn't say it's exactly a silver bullet, but it helps you to be more fine-tuned to what the specific need of your organization is, as opposed to trying to boil the ocean.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense too. Yeah, yeah, I guess as you were talking, I was just thinking about ultimately, the goal is still to serve your clients and to serve them well, right? So payments is a tool that can help you to do a better job at that. So it really isn't siloed from what they're doing as as their mission, as their overall goal as a company, why they exist. And yeah, so that makes a lot of sense to make sure that those are integrated. So, Peter, before I let you go, I want to make sure that our audience knows how they could get in touch with you, especially if they're interested in learning more about your services and maybe engaging you, for getting some advice from you on their go forward plans. So, what information would you like to share with our audience?
Yeah, best way to connect with me is on LinkedIn. It's slash Payments Jedi on LinkedIn, or Peter Davey. You can look me up either way. Additionally, Peter at paymentsjedi.com is a good way to reach me. and always wanting to chat with financial institutions and technology providers who just need help navigating this world. I think there's a good opportunity for a lot of folks to succeed here, and it's going to take a magnitude of folks to actually be able to service the entire industry. So, let's figure out what specific capabilities the organization needs, and chart that path forward.
Sounds good. All right. Well, and I just want to thank you, Peter, so much for your time. I really appreciate your insights, and I know our audience does it well as well. And I want to thank everybody for watching today.